Hey friends! Welcome to Cook with Kris. I am just going to give it a second for some people to hop on. We are going to be making creamy chicken pot pie soup today. This is one of our family favorite recipes. This is not a recipe that I've shared yet on the blog. This has only been shared to the Supermama Society, which is my private group coaching membership. So this is going to be a treat to share this with you guys. It is very simple. You do not need a ton of kitchen skills to make this delicious stew, but I'm going to share some with you today. I am so excited to start these up and to really share some of the skills that I've learned over the years and some really delicious recipes with you. So I'm going to go ahead and take a sip of my tea. This is my favorite tea from Starbucks. If you guys haven't had it, it's the Jade Citrus Mint Tea. It's a nice, kind of refreshing tea in the afternoon because it has a little bit of citrus and mint in it, but it's a green tea. So it is 2, and we've got a couple people hopping in. So I'm going to go ahead and just share with you what you're going to need for this stew. You probably aren't going to be cooking along with me right now, unless you want to get dinner ready early, which I am all for. You'll probably just follow along, but I'll share with you what I'm using. And then in the future, if you want to do, we might do a couple cook with me's kind of later on in the day, in the evening time, if you want to cook right alongside me, but I'll still start by sharing with you what you're going to need if you want to make this at home now or in the future, and then we'll start cooking. And I'll just kind of chat with you as we go, and if you have questions, feel free to ask them. I'll do my best to answer them during breaks while I'm cooking. So first couple of things you're going to need. It's a chicken pot pie. So it is basically the ingredients for chicken pot pie, but put in a stew form instead of in a pie pastry crust. But it's delicious, I promise. So what do we need? All right, you're going to need an onion. Now, this is something we're going to talk about in just a minute because this is one of the biggest questions that I get asked about cooking is how do I chop an onion without crying for the rest of the day? So I will share that with you in just a minute. That's what we're going to start with. You need an onion, just one medium-sized onion. And of course, we're going to start with our Mirepoix. So Mirepoix, for those of you who don't know, it is a French term and it's the basis of most soups and stews. And it's also used as a flavoring agent for sauces as well. So half the time you actually take the Mirepoix out of whatever you're cooking, but we're going to leave it in because it's part of the soup. So Mirepoix is a 2-1-1 ratio of chopped onions, celery, and carrots. So this is about two stalks of celery and 2 stalks of carrots, which equal about 1 kind of medium-sized onion. So that's what we're going to start with. So we're going to start by sauteing up the onion, adding in some garlic. You guys, I love garlic, so I use really big garlic, cloves of garlic. You'll need 2 to 3 cloves of garlic. You can use as many as you want. Hey, if you want to add 6, I'm all for it. It's good for your immune system and it's delicious. So I'm going to add 3 big cloves of garlic in there. You're also going to need some sort of a potato. So I am using a Japanese sweet potato, which is a white sweet potato. This is already prepped. Most of these things I've already done a little mise en place. I've already prepped these ahead during my meal prep, and this I prep just ahead. I don't typically prep any sort of white potatoes or white sweet potatoes ahead of time because they do oxidize. They do tend to go brown. And this has only been like 15 minutes and it's already starting to turn. And that's fine if they oxidize. You can still use them in a soup or a stew. It's not gonna kill you, but they just don't look as good, right? So I'm using a white sweet potato because I'm actually allergic. I guess I'm immune sensitive. They came up on an immune sensitivity test a couple years ago, so I'm allergic to potatoes. So I don't eat a lot of potatoes. So we're using white sweet potato. You can use sweet potato. You can use regular, just a white russet potato as well, peeled and chopped, cubed. And you'll also need some peas. These are optional, but this is the rest of the bag of frozen peas. We don't have a lot, but usually I use about a half of a cup of frozen peas. You could also add some frozen corn if you want. We don't use a lot of corn in our house because my oldest daughter is sensitive to corn. And that is thankfully the majority of the food sensitivities in our house, just corn and potatoes. So we're pretty good. All right, so those are kind of your main ingredients, your veggies. You're obviously gonna need some chicken. So hold on a sec. I've got my prepped chicken. So you could cook up, like I'm going to show you, the onion and the celery and the carrots and the garlic, take those out and then add in raw chicken and cook that up and then proceed with the stew if you would like. I like meal prepping chicken ahead of time. So this can either be cubed chicken or it can be chicken from a rotisserie chicken or from a slow cooker chicken that you cooked ahead of time. And I just made some shredded chicken in the Instant Pot if you saw my meal prep on Sunday. So that's what I'm going to use today. You'll need about, I'm looking at the recipe over here to make sure I'm giving you exact measurements because let's be real, I don't always cook according to recipes. I make recipes, and then I don't cook according to them. So 3 cups. You'll need about 3 cups of shredded chicken. This is just shredded chicken breast, but you can use any part of the chicken that feels good to you. All right, so those are our main ingredients. You're also gonna need some fresh herbs. So you don't have to use fresh. If all you've got is dried, use what you've got. I am all about substitutions. I'm all about use what you've got. I will give you my best suggestions I can if you ask me about a substitution. There's not always a substitution, but for a lot of things there are. So I've got fresh sage here. We've got a sage in our house, so we have to use fresh. And I've got some fresh thyme here as well. And I've also got a bay leaf here as well that I stole from my mom's cupboard. I didn't really steal it, I borrowed it. Because I don't have any left at my house, but a bay leaf is a good ingredient as well. And that comes out at the end, by the way. We can't digest bay leaves. And then the last thing, other than some broth, so I'm just using like the Aldi bone broth because that's what I've got. Oftentimes I have homemade chicken broth. You could use vegetable broth. You could use whatever broth you have on hand. But I don't have homemade, so I'm just using what I got. And then you can either use a coconut cream. This is coconut cream. This is the leftover can from something I made the other night. Or you can use heavy cream, whichever one you prefer, and we're gonna add that in right at the end. And to thicken the soup, you have, or the stew, to make it a stew, because it's pot pie, and pot pie is like creamy and hearty and delicious. Obviously, you're gonna put a little bit of cream in there, but you're gonna wanna thicken it a little bit as well. So I'm gonna use arrowroot powder, which is what makes this gluten-free. You could absolutely use a whole wheat flour if you wanted to, or just all-purpose flour, whatever you want to. In that instance, I recommend making a roux at the beginning. So adding your oil to the pan or butter, adding a couple tablespoons of flour, whisking that together, and then proceeding with the recipe. That's what I would recommend if you want to thicken with that, but it's just as easy to use this. So I'll show you how to use this. We're going to use arrowroot. You could also use cornstarch as well. Both of them work the same. We're going to make a slurry at the end. So if you wanted to use flour, you could, but it's more complicated. So just use the arrowroot, okay? It's a lot easier. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So let's start by just sharing with you a little bit about onions, okay? I get asked about onions all the time because onions are terrifying for a lot of people, mostly because they're hard to cut, and it's really funny. I came in today, and so I'm at my mom's house. This is where I cook. This is the Healthy Mama Kitchen. Any of my courses I filmed in here. This is my mom's house because her kitchen is lighter and brighter and easier to cook in than mine. And I was talking to her about what I was going to share today, and she's like, I've got to learn how to cut an onion. And I'm like, Mom, because she knows the first thing I'm going to say is, the sharper the knife, and my knife is, sorry, it has some sweet potato on it. It's not just it's not just dirty all the time. It's dirty because of the sweet potato, and I didn't rinse it off. But sharper the knife, okay, the less you cry. When you use a sharp knife, so when you keep your knife sharpened, so when you go to get it sharpened, you get it sharpened at Whole Foods or Williams-Sonoma, or there's a lot of places around that'll sharpen your knife. I have a professional knife sharpener, not like a person in my house, but an actual like electric sharpener that I use about once every 3 to 5 weeks. I want to say it's about once a month, but sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, depending on how much I'm chopping, because I do like to keep my knives really sharp. And then in between, you can use a honing steel. I know there's one in here. Or not, maybe not, that's okay. You can use a honing steel as well to keep it sharp. But if your knife is sharp, you are much less likely to cry because you are going to be slicing through it fast, and there's going to be less of those like juices, for lack of a better word, the aromatics that are going to go into your eyes and make you cry. Yes, there are onion goggles, and that's why they work. It's because, you know, those the particles from those aromatics are not getting in your eye, right? So if your knife is sharp, and if you know how to chop an onion the right way, you're way less likely to cry. And as with anything, the sharper your knife, and I'm moving the things away from my cutting board so I can actually chop this without chopping myself. My biggest tip when it comes to not hurting yourself in the kitchen, because I know a lot of people are afraid of big knives because they're like, I'm going to cut myself. If your knife is sharp, you're way less likely to cut yourself because you're way less likely, whoops, I'm throwing onions. You're way less likely for it to stick, okay? You want it to go through whatever you're cutting very easily. And that's why it's really important when you're chopping too, to chop using a knife that's big enough for the activity that you're going to partake in. So whatever you're gonna do, so if you're gonna cut an onion, like this knife is obviously big enough to cut this onion. But if I'm going to go ahead and, I mean, this is my like normal 8-inch chef's knife, but I have a little vegetable knife that I love and that I use often. It's not within reach. I'll show you guys next time because it's amazing. It's by Global Knives, just like this one. No, they don't sponsor me. I just love them. I've been using them for over a decade, so they're great. But the vegetable knife is like a little 6-inch knife, and it works great for small tasks like chopping carrots and celery and vegetables, right? And it stays really sharp, but it's not big enough for something like a butternut squash. And you are way more likely to cut yourself if you're trying to like cut through a butternut squash with a little knife and you like slip because it's not going through. Same thing with onions, same thing with anything. You want to make sure your knife is sharp on a regular basis and big enough for the task that you use. You do not need to be afraid of a big knife. It's all about knowing how to handle it. So let's go over that really quick, okay? With my sticky knife. All right, so when you're holding a knife, first and foremost, you want to choke your knife. So this is going to feel awkward at first. I promise you, it's going to feel weird if you don't already do this, but I promise you that once this becomes second nature, it's a lot easier. So your whole goal with a knife is that you have leverage to chop evenly. So when your hand is back here, you're floppy. No one wants a floppy knife. So you're gonna choke your knife. So you're gonna put your thumb on one side, okay, and your forefinger tucked on the other side. So your wrist is just sort of resting back here. When you are doing that, you are going to have a much easier time slicing through with precision and with easy force. If you're not trying to force something to slice. You are using the leverage of your body as well as your sharp knife to cut because you have control of your knife, right? Your knife just becomes an extension of your arm. That's the whole goal. We'll talk about knife skills in the future. But I started when I'm cutting an onion by cutting the top and the bottom off. First things first. I didn't bring a scrap bowl. Whoops. That's okay. First things first, top and bottom off, because you always want to make sure whatever you're cutting, you've got a flat surface. Then I'm going to slice it in half. Okay, I'll be honest. I cut a little bit deeper than I wanted to. You just want to cut just to the root. You want to keep it together when you're dicing an onion. I wasn't really paying attention because I was talking to you guys. But typically, you want to make sure that you leave a little bit of that root in there. And by the way, when you slice your onion in half, it's a lot easier to peel than when it's whole. All right, super easy. So now what we're gonna do, hoping that you've got a little bit of the root left on here to keep it together. When you're slicing an onion, when you're dicing an onion, we're just gonna talk about dicing today. Your onion has these really beautiful lines on it, okay, that guide you and teach you how to slice or dice your onion. So if you were to slice it, you would just slice along the side, right? But if you're going to dice it, all you're gonna wanna do is use the tip of your knife. Make sure you're still choking your knife, okay? So you're gonna use the tip of your knife and you're just going to slice down like that. I'm going nice and slow for you guys. And you're just gonna go right up to the end. So you're leaving a little bit of space there so it's actually staying together. Okay, normally I would go faster, but I'm afraid that I'm gonna cut myself if I'm trying to look at you and also go fast. All right, so that's the first thing we're gonna do. So now you just have slits all the way along your onion. Try your best to keep them as even as possible. Now, a lot of chefs will also go ahead and do one of these and put their hand flat on the top. And this is how I learned in culinary school too. You kind of keep it together and you slice halfway. I find that unnecessary for most kitchen tools. It's just like an extra step. So I usually just go slice and then the opposite direction, okay? What? It's like magic. Once you know how to do that, everything in the kitchen is easier. Everything's easier. Make sure to move things away from your knife. Okay, and the last little bit, I'm just literally slicing it. I'm just giving it a little rough chop. I'm making a soup. We're not looking for perfection here. I'm not trying to win any culinary awards right now. We're just making stew, okay? So what's important when you're cutting is just that the things that you're cutting are about the same size, especially when you're cooking a soup or a stew or roasting something and you want everything to cook at about the same rate. If you have pieces of onion that are like the size of your finger and you have pieces of onion that are like the size of, I don't know, a pencil eraser, what? One is gonna cook faster than the other is what I'm trying to say. So, got my half of an onion chopped in here and I'm gonna go ahead and do the other half here. Just chopping this up. So you're just slicing along those lines, okay, leaving a little bit of room at the end. Making sure when you are cutting too that you're using the claw, like my daughter likes to call it. I'm teaching my daughter and one of her best friends for homeschool on Thursdays. We're doing cooking lessons, and so we've been working on knife skills the last couple of weeks with everything that we've done. They learned knife skills the first week, and then from there, today we made caramel apples, and so they're really just practicing, you know, how to hold the knife and how to stay safe with the knife in the kitchen, because I really want them to have confidence to use a knife in the kitchen and not be afraid of the big, bad, scary knife. Like I keep trying to convince my mom to use a big knife, and she hasn't yet. So Mom, when you're watching this later, gotta get you a big knife, a sharp knife. So my eyes are starting to water a little bit at this point, but I'm not crying everywhere. I've also been cutting this really slow and like steady because I've been chatting with you guys. So that's another thing. But for the most part, I'm pretty good. I'm a little watery, but I'm not all over the place, and I'm tossing onions everywhere. This is real life Cook with Kris. This is unedited, guys. So let's go ahead. Now that I've got my onions chopped, the only other thing I need to do is garlic. But what I want to do is I want to start with my heavy bottomed pot. Okay, so this is what I'm going to use. This is my lovely Dutch oven. I use this for everything from soups and stews to sourdough bread. I have got a pasta pot and this pot and then like a little tiny saucepan. And that is literally all I have in terms of pots. You do not need a ton of crazy equipment in the kitchen to be a good cook. This is great. Heavy bottomed pan. This is cast iron. I'm gonna go ahead and put a swirl of oil on the bottom. You could use ghee for this if you want. I'm gonna use avocado oil because I left my ghee at home. And I'm just gonna turn it up to about medium, which I'm not going to. And I'm gonna let that heat up for just a few seconds while I get the garlic ready. We're gonna start by putting the onions in. We're gonna cook the onions until they're translucent, which means see-through. So as we get going, I'm just gonna show you a couple of my favorite tools that I like to use in the kitchen. So I'm just gonna show you one. There's no other tools. My knife. The other tool I wanna show you is the microplane. Now, if Microplane wants to sponsor me, that would be awesome. Because I talk about microplanes all the time. If you come to one of my cooking classes in person, or hey, here on Instagram, you're gonna hear me talk about the microplane because it's literally like, I couldn't live without my microplane. And you guys, you wanna see something? I need a new one. This microplane has cooked with me through so many cooking classes and so many kitchens, and I've had this since I was a personal chef. So I had a smaller one in culinary school, and then afterwards I bought this. So this is like almost 10 years old, and it's lasted me. So this is like the best $20 you're gonna spend in the kitchen. It's great. So I use it for citrus zest, obviously, because it's a zester, but I also use it for garlic and ginger. So I just like to use it over a bowl. And look at how easy that is. A lot of people like a garlic press, but here's why I don't like a garlic press, because it's really hard to clean. And that's kind of annoying. So you want to peel your garlic ahead of time, of course, but then that's all you got to do. And then you've got perfectly minced garlic ready to go. So as I'm doing this, I've got my pan heating up in the background. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the onion, and this will be the next thing to go in. If you actually let your garlic, if you mince your garlic and you let it sit out for a while, it releases allicin, the immune-fighting compound in garlic. So it's actually good to leave your garlic out for a couple minutes. I think it's 10 minutes is what the study said. I don't know. We're going to go ahead and put the onion in. All right. All right, I'm going to give it a little stir, just to coat it with the oil. The hot oil, as well as the pan, are what are cooking the onions. So you want to make sure you coat them well with oil. I'm not going to season this quite yet, but I will season the vegetables after. It's important to season as you go so that all of your ingredients are seasoned, rather than trying to salt it all together and hope that everything gets coated. Seasoning as you go is really important. So we're just going to let those onions go over there. And while we let the onions go, we're just going to go ahead and make sure everything else is ready. So I've got my carrots and I've got my celery, and these are going to go in next. Once the onion is pretty much translucent, I'm going to add in the garlic, and that's just going to need kind of like a couple seconds swirl in the pan. You don't want it to stick. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the carrots and the celery. And then we're also going to cook those until they're just starting to soften just a little bit. Not a ton, nothing crazy. because this is a stew, and so it's going to need to simmer for a little bit. And then I'm going to add the herbs. So you can add the thyme sprig just like this, and what'll happen is as it starts to simmer in the stew for a little while, it's the little pieces of the little thyme branch. No, this is the branch. Leaves. The little thyme leaves are going to fall off, and then we're going to go into your soup, and they're going to season it. It's going to be delicious. And then you can just pull this out at the end. Since you're pulling out your bay leaf anyway, and even if you forget to pull it out, it's not that big a deal unless you're cooking for like the Queen of England. That'd be cool. Okay, I'm gonna chop some herbs over here. So the way I like to chop fresh sage, it's a little bit different than you might want to chop something like parsley or cilantro, and we can talk about that a different way, but I like to do just kind of a chiffonade. So with a chiffonade, you're just gonna stack any of your herbs together. This works with basil. It also works with spinach and things like that as well. And then I'm just going to go to one end. So it's all rolled up. Just stack it and roll it. Sorry, I didn't mention the rolling part. Stack it and roll it. And I'm just going to chop it up. Slice it up nice and thin. Now, if you like bigger pieces, you can put it in just like this. They're just these like little swirls now. But I'm just going to go ahead and chop it the other way. And you just kind of keep bunching it together until it's chopped up, all nice and small. Super easy, and it smells like Thanksgiving. It smells so, so good. I love sage, and both sage and thyme. This is like a really great immune boosting soup as well. I want to bring some gentle nutrition into this kitchen, which I always love to do. Thyme and sage are both great for your immune system, and so is garlic. So look at that. All right, I'm gonna go check on the onions. We're looking good. Don't be afraid to put your pan at a medium-high heat. As long as you are staying with your food and making sure it doesn't burn, you don't need to spend an hour standing over. You don't need to spend an hour standing over your pan waiting for your onions to cook. It really doesn't need to take forever. Using a pan with good conductivity is also really helpful. Like cast iron is great. Stainless steel is good. So is copper. Those are my favorite. Ceramic is pretty good too. A lot of people use ceramic, but it's not as good. I don't think it's as good in my opinion. A lot of people use nonstick, and nonstick's good for nonstick, but it's not as conductive. Cast iron is great, and I find things cook up really fast in the cast iron. So cast iron pots are definitely an investment, so you definitely want to save up for them, but they're worth it, and they will live forever. They'll last you your whole life. So they're a really good investment in the kitchen. So onions pretty good over there, and since everything else is ready, you guys, this is why I talk about meal prep, because already having these ready to go. Okay, if I'm at home, I'm just kind of standing here like, what am I going to talk to them about? Other than chopping up the sweet potatoes ahead, which I'm actually going to give some of these a little bit more of a chop, because I want this to be done like by the time we get off together. And we don't have that much time together because Instagram only gives me an hour. And when I do this at home, friends, this takes me like, I don't know, like 5-10 minutes to throw on, and then probably like 30 minutes total to just get it all going. So I'm gonna go ahead and, yeah, we're ready. I'm gonna go ahead and add in that garlic, like I mentioned, and then we're gonna add in our carrots and our celery. So I'm gonna bring that over there. And I'm gonna grab a spoon to get all of the garlic up in there. Mixing that around, just using a wooden spatula. It smells delicious. I wish you could be here with me. Oh my goodness, so good. I don't know if I find anything better than the smell of garlic right when it gets put in the pan. It is so good. All right, we're gonna add our celery and our carrots. Gonna mix that on up. If you want your vegetables when you're cooking a soup, if you want them to cook up a little bit faster, you can put the cover on, because it will steam them just a little bit. So I'm going to do that just so they cook up a little bit faster, so we can actually do this in a reasonable amount of time. But I wanted to do this live with you guys because I actually asked you if you would rather me do these live or kind of record it and put it on stories. And honestly, I think I'm going to do a mix of both, depending on the recipe I'm cooking. Obviously, if I'm cooking a stew that's going to take like an hour to simmer, this one's not, but that's going to take an hour to simmer. Obviously, I'm not going to be on with you live because ain't nobody got time for that. And I want you guys to actually watch this later and be like, oh, that was a great cooking lesson. It was only like, 30, 40 minutes, whatever. This will probably be like 40 minutes today is kind of what I predict. And I'm wordy, clearly. That's why I have a podcast, because I like to talk. No, because I like to share and also talk to other incredible guests. Check out the Healthy Balanced Mama podcast if you have not yet. Shameless plug, because I love my podcast and I love my podcast guests. But I will probably do some stories, but for lives, it's fun because you guys can just be with me in the kitchen and we can hang out, we can chat, and you can ask questions. I don't see any questions. Bring some to me. I'm a little far to bring some to you today. CHS Girl Scouts at 4, but maybe another day. Any more requests for me bringing stew to your house? All right, I think we're about ready to go ahead and put the other ingredients in because it should just be about a minute. That's all it's going to take for them to start to cook down. Oh yeah. So good. All right. What else do I want to put in next? All right, we're just going to put everything in. And then I'm going to show you how to make a slurry. All right, we're literally going to go ahead and put everything except for so we're going to put all of the spices. We're going to put some, I told you I was going to season it and I didn't because I'm talking. We're going to go ahead and season the vegetables. I'm going to put in the chicken. I'm going to put in the sweet potatoes. We're going to save the peas till the end so they don't get too kind of light green and mushy. Nobody likes mushy peas. So we're going to go ahead and put these in. All right, so I've got my sweet potatoes. I've got my shredded chicken. The chicken is already seasoned from when I cooked it. I'm going to go ahead and put my sage in a little cup and then my thyme. I'm going to stir this up before I add the thyme, and I'm going to add a big old pinch of sea salt. We're going to talk about seasoning soon because actually knowing how to season your food is a skill, believe it or not, and I want to teach it to you. So we're going to talk about seasoning your food, we're going to talk about salt. What other things do you guys want me to talk about when it comes to cooking skills? I want to know. I did a post earlier today asking you guys what you wanted to learn about. I only read a couple of the comments because I was, or one of the comments because I was teaching the girls earlier today. But I want you to hop on there or hop into my DMs and share with me what you want to learn, okay? I'm going to make sure my headphones are actually in. I want to know what you want to learn. I want to know what skills you want to have. I want to know what recipes you want to see me make. I'm here for you. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to grab my bay leaves and I'm going to add some broth, and then that's going to be it for a couple minutes. I'm going to let it all simmer together, and we are going to chat about slurries and how to make a slurry, which is a hard word to say. All right. And like I said, I am using just bone broth in the Tetra Pak, but you can use homemade if you got homemade. I usually do in the wintertime, but it is not that season quite yet. So I want this to be a stew, okay? So you can make this a soup if you would like, but I want it to be a stew. I want it to feel basically like I'm eating the filling of a chicken pot pie. So I'm going to start with just about 2 or 3 cups. Okay, and depending on your ingredients, you can use up to 4 to 5 cups if you want to, or if you want it to be a soup. I'm going to start with that because you can always add more later. And then I'm going to add that bay leaf in there as well. Salt, broth, pretty much anything in the kitchen. Seasonings, for the most part, it's always okay to start small. I'm going to cover this and turn it up so it brings it to a little bit of a boil. pretty much with anything in the kitchen, it's important to start small, and then you can always add more later. You don't want to add so much salt that the whole thing is salty and you can't take any of the salt away. That bone broth is unsalted. Otherwise, I would put less salt in if I'm using a broth that's got some salt in it, because salt is, your food's not supposed to taste salty. Salt is supposed to bring out the flavor in your food. That's the goal of salting food, is to bring out the flavor and to actually season the food instead of just make it taste salty. So less is more with a lot of these things, right? So salt, when it comes to the broth, like I said, if you want to make it the consistency you want, add a little bit to start, and then you can always add more. Same thing with the cream that we're going to use in a little bit. But while that is starting to simmer a little bit, this is so fun. Oh, good. I'm so glad. Oh, let me know what you would love to learn. Shoot me a DM. Leave a comment on my latest post. I would love to know what you would like to learn. All right, so the last thing that we're gonna do today, before that's just gonna simmer over there, I'm going to teach you about slurries. So let me grab another little bowl. Okay, so a slurry is literally just, so I mentioned at the beginning a roux, and we can talk about that on a different day, but a roux is basically a 50-50 oil or butter to flour mixture that you heat on the stove and you add broth to it and it thickens your soup or your stew or your sauce. A slurry does the same thing, but you put it in at the end. So I'm using arrowroot starch, and you can use cornstarch for this as well. Those are like the main two. And depending on how thick you want your slurry, you can do a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1 ratio. So again, I recommend, like I said, in the kitchen, starting small. So I'm gonna do a 1-to-2 ratio. So 1 tablespoon of arrowroot to 2 tablespoons of, I'm actually gonna use broth because I still have a little bit of broth, because I don't want to overwhelm the stew and make the stew really thick, because it's a stew. I'm not actually making a sauce. Now, if I was going to actually make this as a stew, as the chicken pot pie filling, then I would probably do the opposite. I would do 2-to-1. So I would do 2 tablespoons to 1. And you want to, when you're making a slurry, you want it to be cold. And then you put it in at the very end, especially with arrowroot. You could put cornstarch in a little bit earlier, but arrowroot is going to thicken right away. And you can always add another tablespoon of arrowroot. You want to do the slurry again, just want to add it straight to the pot. Please don't add it straight to the pot. It's going to clump up and be gross. You don't want that. So you can always add another slurry to it if you want to. If it's not thick enough, it's all according to what you want, but we're basically going to add in that tablespoon of arrowroot and this 2 tablespoons of water, or broth, which is what I used. And we're just gonna whisk it up, and you're just gonna notice that it's just gonna get, where do you get your broth? Okay, so I typically make broth homemade, and that's literally just my leftover chicken bones with carrot, celery, onion, garlic, and if I have any herbs on hand, and I fill it up with the water in the slow cooker and leave it overnight, and then I strain it. That's all I do. But this is from Aldi, which is only, I think Aldi's only in the US. I mean, it's overseas too. I'm not sure if there's Aldi in Canada. But this is from Aldi, and it's just bone broth, and there's no, it's just chicken stock. There's no sodium or anything like that in it, which is nice, because I would rather add the salt myself, like I was talking about, and I would rather have the salt and the seasonings and things like that myself, so I just keep it really simple. But I just use, so if you're looking for a broth that doesn't have like a bunch of added salt, and the reason why I don't isn't even for the sodium content, it's for the flavoring. I want to be able to flavor it myself, and I want to be able to season it myself. So I look for chicken stock or bone broth and just look for unsalted, and that's what I typically use. So you can get it from most major grocery stores. They'll have a chicken stock. There's I think it's a brand, I literally think it's called Kitchen Basics is the brand, and I think it's in both US and Canada, and they, I used to live in Canada, for those of you who don't know, so I have a little knowledge of what is in both countries, and I think they have it in both countries, and they have just chicken stock or whatever stock you want to use, and it doesn't have any added stuff in it. It's just chicken stock. Yeah. Yes, and add salt after. So I salted my vegetables, and my chicken was already salted because I cooked the chicken ahead of time. I just shredded the chicken this was Instant Pot shredded chicken, but you could use rotisserie. You could use, if you cooked a chicken in the slow cooker a couple days before, you could use that. You can use whatever chicken you want. You could even cook the chicken in the beginning stages, after you cook the vegetables, you could cook it in the pan and then add everything back together. If you wanted to, it would obviously not be so quick. It would add an extra step. But I season the chicken ahead of time, and then I season the vegetables. I typically season the vegetables when I cook them, and then at the very end, I taste it and add more salt as needed. I kind of salt as I go, because you really want the different ingredients to have flavor in and of themselves. So when you're tasting it, it's not like this is like it's just a plain carrot and a plain onion, and then, oh, this chicken is like really flavorful and delicious. You want it all to be seasoned, because yes, it is, the flavors are going to meld, but especially when it's not something that's going to be in a slow cooker or a braiser for hours and hours, it's really not going to have that much time for the flavors to kind of all meld together. So yes, it will be infused with a little bit of salt, and that's like kind of the science of cooking we can talk about, like not right now, on another day. Different vegetables are going to take different times for the pores to open and the salt to go in. Anyway, wet heat or moist heat versus dry heat. There's so many things we can talk about, and we will come back and we will talk about all of the cooking things on a different day. But yes, I season things as I go, and then I add a little bit more at the end so I can kind of control the seasoning. And so it's not like, and I've done this in the past myself, where I've like just grabbed a chicken broth or sent my husband out for one or whatever, just like, oh no, I'm out of broth and I don't have any in the freezer. And so he'll go out and grab some, and I'll add it to a soup, and I'll season it, and I'll taste it after, and I'll be like, that was seasoned chicken broth. Whoops. Well, today we are going to have an extra salty soup. And it's funny because my kids love it. Like my kids, when I love to make sauteed kale. And one day I over-seasoned the kale, and like, it was just, I'm just working fast, and I just seasoned it and wasn't realizing that, kale is typically you chop it up and it's this like big mound of kale, and then when you saute it, it's like this little mound of kale. And so I over-seasoned it one day, and my daughter's like, this tastes like the ocean. I'm like, it does taste a little bit like the ocean. See, not perfect at all. Having, a culinary background does not mean that you will never over-season your food or under-season your food, or it's just about knowing the skills to make things good most of the time. But anyway, she called it ocean kale, and so now she's like, can you make it taste like the ocean? Thanks. But she likes it, so okay. It works. All right, so this is our slurry, and for me, I think this is going to be enough to thicken my soup, but you can put as much as you want in. There's one other key I want to share about arrowroot specifically. So arrowroot, like I said, it's naturally gluten-free because it's a root. You could use tapioca, but I don't like the texture of tapioca as much. I use tapioca more when I'm making like kind of like sticky, like Chinese style food, because it does kind of have a little bit more of that kind of sticky texture, and I find that arrowroot's a little bit more smooth and thickens it a little bit more like cornstarch. Arrowroot and dairy aren't really friends. So if you are okay with corn, I would use cornstarch if you want to use cream. You can use cream with the arrowroot. It just sometimes gets a little bit icky. Sometimes. But I would recommend cornstarch and cream, C and C. Oh, I guess this is C too. Arrowroot, and I'm using coconut cream. But try it out. See what works best for you, what you like. But again, the same principle applies with just adding a little bit. Try out a little bit and see how it is. So what I would do if you're like, oh, I only have arrowroot and I only have cream and I want to make this creamy. You could also make this without the cream. You do not need to add the cream to this. You can totally just have it kind of as a chicken soup with some added peas to it if you wanted to. It will still be delicious with the sage and the thyme and the garlic, absolutely. But what I would do is I would take out like a little scoop of the soup and then add a little bit of the arrowroot slurry, add a little bit of your cream, and see how the consistency is. For me, I prefer arrowroot and coconut cream or cornstarch and heavy cream, like regular cream. All right, I'm going to go check on it because it is bubbling back there. I've got my headphones on, so you might not be able to hear it, but you will in a second. All right, we're looking good. Okay, so you could theoretically put all of these ingredients in a slow cooker and leave that baby on all day long. Come home and then just go ahead and add in the arrowroot slurry and the peas. 100%. Totally do that. The potatoes will definitely be soft if you do that. And if you are okay with that, that is 100% going to make your life easier. Go ahead and do that. If you were doing it at home like I am right now, it will take about as long as the potatoes need to cook. So I'm going to take a potato out, and if it pierces with a fork, it's done. All right. And like I mentioned at the beginning, you want your potatoes to be about, here, I'll show you. You want your potatoes to be about the same size so they all cook at about the same rate. All right, let's see. Let's actually put it on the table. Okay, it pierces with a fork, but it needs like 1 minute. Taste as you go. This is huge. They're gonna need about a minute. So what I'm gonna do while I'm waiting for the sweet potatoes to just finish cooking for about a minute, and if you're just joining, I'm using white sweet potatoes. You can use white russet potatoes, whatever potatoes you got. You could use yellow sweet potatoes if you want to. I just happen to like the Japanese sweet potatoes. They have a much milder flavor than orange sweet potatoes, and they're just really delicious. The texture is a little bit starchier. So they're a little bit sweeter than a white potato, but they're still kind of starchy like a white potato versus a sweet potato I find is a little bit mushier. So I'm gonna go ahead and taste this for seasoning. Remember, I added the garlic, I added the thyme, I added the sage, I added a bay leaf, and we're gonna take those out after. But the thyme sprig and the bay leaf, not the sage. I'm gonna taste it because it's important as you're cooking to taste as you go and to also know that when foods are hot, they're gonna taste less salty. So let it cool for a second before you taste it, because if you add more salt because you're like, oh, I can't even taste it because I just burned my tongue, or it just, it's really hot and your taste buds are not recognizing that salty flavor, you might end up over seasoning it. So let it cool for a second before you taste it, but I'm gonna go ahead and taste it. That's pretty good. I don't think it needs a lot more. I think it's pretty good. I'm just gonna I'm gonna cover it for 1 more minute and just let that simmer. It is almost there. And then if you want, you can add a little bit more salt. If you wanted, you can, I almost forgot to add these. You can add a little bit more salt, and if you wanted to, you could add more herbs at this point too, if you're like, it's just not up to par. I did mention this earlier. I did say that you can substitute, and you can use dried herbs if you don't have fresh sage and fresh thyme. So it's about a 3-to-1 ratio. So if you're using fresh sage, so if you're using about a tablespoon of fresh sage, then you want about a teaspoon of dried. That's chopped up. So it's about a teaspoon of dried sage is kind of a lot. That's going to be very sagey. But it's about approximately, I would go a little bit less on the dried herbs that are a little bit more robust, like sage or oregano. The thyme, you could totally get away with a teaspoon of thyme if you're going to use about a tablespoon. But I wasn't. 1 sprig is like probably a teaspoon itself. So I would just do like, a little shake of thyme and maybe like a half teaspoon of dried sage if you wanted to use that. And then you can always taste. You can always taste from there. Now you do want to add your dried herbs at the beginning because they need time to actually soften. So those aromatic compounds, which are providing the flavor, are going to release. All right, I'm going to add the peas in there too. And if you want to use corn, you can add that as well. These are just frozen peas that I've defrosted, just sitting out on the counter. And I use about 1/2 cup. And looking at this, it is already pretty thick. It doesn't need a ton more. I'm going to add a tiny little splash of that broth before I go in and add that slurry to just thicken it up just a little bit. Just like with food, there are no rules in the kitchen. There's basic skills that are helpful to know, but you can do what feels right for you. When you get to know your kitchen, when you get to know the foods that you like and the flavors that you like, you can start to wing it a little bit more. But having those basic skills is really important, and that's why I'm so excited to share with you guys. All right, adding the slurry, and we'll see how it thickens up. And I'll bring it over here to show you how it thickens up. Let's protect the counter first. Okay, 1 sec. All right. There we go. Ooh, look at that. Okay, we're pretty thick right now. I know it's a little bit hard to see. We're pretty thick and pretty hearty right now. I was going to do the slurry over there, but I really want you guys to see this. Yes. Okay, I wanted to make sure I didn't have any other questions. So, the consistency right now, if you can see, without spilling it all over the counter, it's like a stew. It's pretty thick. You could add more broth, like I said, and make it a soup. But the broth itself is still, it's still just broth. So to make it creamy and to make it a little bit more like a chicken pot pie, I'm going to go ahead and this is like a kids don't try it at home moment. I almost just stuck my finger in the stew, which would be very much like me because I can't really feel my fingertips anymore after so many years in the kitchen. But it's not safe, so we're going to do it safe. I'm looking for that bay leaf. I'm going to take out the bay leaf and the thyme. There we go. Hey, bay leaf. Okay, we're taking out the bay leaf and we're taking out the thyme. And then we're going to go ahead and add in that slurry. Again, it's already pretty thick, but you could, remember we're adding this in cold. It's going to start to thicken immediately. I'm just making it a little bit thicker. So I'm just going to stir it. I'm just using a fork. You can use whatever. And, okay, there we go. Let's see if, I'm going to see if I can turn it so you guys can see this. And sort of see it from there. It's steamy in here. Okay. I don't think it's going to be that easy to tell over over the phone, but it's just a little bit, let's see. Can we do it? Can we do it? Not really. It's just a little bit creamier. And again, if you want it creamier, then just double. If you want it even thicker than this, just double up on the arrowroot or the cornstarch, whichever one you're using, and it'll give it that thick texture. And then for these final little, sorry if that's an annoying sound, the final little splash, whether you are using cream or or coconut cream, okay, we're just gonna give it right at the end, and this will cool it down a little bit before serving. And this is coconut cream, not coconut milk. It makes a difference if you want to make this dairy-free. You do not have to. A little swirl, like a quarter of a cup. Doesn't need a ton. We're just making it creamy. And it's so good, you guys. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to eat this. It's 2:46. It's not dinner time. I already ate lunch. I want dinner now. And it smells so good. Can smell-o-vision be the next thing we invent? I know there's more important things on the docket in the world with scientists these days, but like smell-o-vision, it's my number one. That's what I want to happen. I want you guys to be able to smell this. Let me grab a little bowl and I can kind of share with you what it looks like. And I'll taste it one last time. My tasting spoon. Okay. I should have my 7-year-old come down and taste it because she is like the honest taster in our family. She tells me that my food is either, this is a do-over, mommy, is what she calls it. This is a do-over, or, yeah, this is not a do-over, mommy. She's honest. And if she doesn't say it's a do-over, it doesn't go on the blog. Because I consider my 7-year-old like the average North American, apparently. Oh my gosh, it's so good. I do think it needs a little bit more salt now that's a little bit cooler. Other than that, it tastes like the inside of chicken pot pie. So, the other thing you can add is a little bit of cracked black pepper. So, if you do not like chicken pot pie filling, if you do not like the inside of chicken pot pie, you will not like this stew. But if you do like the inside of chicken pot pie, then you will love this stew. And you were just with me here chatting with you for about 45 minutes. Would it take you 45 minutes if you were home making this yourself? Probably not. Because I'm talking the whole time through. And especially if you have a couple things prepped ahead of time. Like I had my carrots and my celery all prepped ahead. And then of course I chopped up the sweet potato a couple minutes ahead as well. But if you had everything chopped up and ready ahead, especially with the chickens ready ahead, this is going to come together in no time. And that's my favorite kind of recipe because I don't think that you need to spend hours and hours in the kitchen to make delicious food. So I want to go ahead and eat this as lunch number 2, cause like a hobbit. How many breakfasts do they have? But if you guys have any other questions, we only have a couple more minutes together. This is so good. I probably shouldn't chew. while I have my headphones in because that's rude. But this was so much fun. I hope you guys liked this. I hope you guys got some tips and tricks today. Couple little cooking tips, and if you weren't on in the beginning, I gave some tips on onions and chopping onions and showed you a really easy way to dice an onion so you can hop back on later. Hopefully Instagram will let me put this on IGTV and you guys can watch it later. I'm going to go ahead and post this recipe to my stories after this so you can make it later at home. And if you make it, oh my gosh, please, please, please post a picture and either on your feed or in your stories and tag me in it, whether you're private or not. I just want to see. I want to see you guys making my recipes. And if you have any other questions about cooking or any other specific recipes of mine or just recipes in general, I will tell you I'm not a baker. I can bake. I don't love to bake. But cooking, this is my forte. So if you guys have recipes you want me to make, skills you want to learn, send me a DM. Or, leave a comment on my latest post. I want to know, and I'll be here with you guys again next week. It'll be a little bit earlier next week because I have client calls in the afternoon. I have client calls every other week. So it'll be a little bit earlier next week, but I'll be back sharing with you guys again, and I haven't decided what we're going to do next week, but I will keep you guys updated on that. All right, thank you guys so much for joining me. I will see you guys again next week.